Stories from Real Life is an independent podcast that is written and produced by Melvin E. Edwards. You can get details about each episode or contribute to the future success of this show by visiting the website at www.podcastreallife.com.
On today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards. Our guest today is Owen Ó Súilleabháin, a native of Limerick, Ireland, who inspires listeners to understand that by connecting with ancient traditional art, story, mythology, and spirituality, we can fulfill a void that exists in our modern soul. Owen believes we are living through a devastating epidemic of loneliness, the root cause of so much of our modern world's problem. Connecting with traditional culture and community is a powerful and ancient medicine to cure this terrible sense of loss and loneliness. Owen's work spans various fields, including education, healthcare, and the corporate world, where he emphasizes the importance of listening and creativity for personal and organizational transformation. His contributions to the arts and leadership are recognized and sought after by numerous organizations globally. Let's meet our guest Owen Ó Súilleabháin and your host, Melvin E. Edwards.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me on this week's storytelling adventure. Our guest is Irish storyteller, musician, and keeper of ancient wisdom, Owen Ó Súilleabháin. But before we get started, I just want to make one point for my audience. I don't want to live in a colorblind society. I want to live together in a culturally diverse and respectful one. When I talk to someone like our guest today, I want to learn from him or learn about him and his culture, and I'm blessed to be able to share that conversation with you. So we are all unique and equally worthy, and that's why we're here today. So, Owen, how are you today? And I extend 100,000 welcomes to you.
Oh, Céad Míle Fáilte, Melvin. And it's an honor to be here, especially with that wonderful intention that you just set. Yeah.
I appreciate you being here. I'm excited about this conversation. So on this episode, we're going to discuss Irish and Celtic culture. But first, let me start with this question. I've got a couple personal questions for you. So I saw online that you described your father as radical and revolutionary in his field. How did his work inspire you?
Radical and revolutionary in his field. Indeed, he was. A fascinating man. He passed away in 2018 at the height of his powers, before his time. But he'd suffered a long illness, and we were all very prepared for his passing. But he had an amazing influence on the culture of Ireland. Amazing man, and as he was as beautiful and generous a father as he was an artistic and cultural leader too, which I love to say early on because I'm a father myself, and I love, to always emphasize the importance of the family life and the home life when speaking about these great grand gestures that people can make culturally and organizationally. I believe really the most important part of our lives is the most personal part of our lives, and the most beautiful part. It's the most difficult part of our lives actually too, and it's the thing we leave behind actually. That's the most important. But anyway, my father was an extraordinarily public persona, and he came of age in the 1960s in Ireland, and went to the university. He won a scholarship to go to university. He was the first in his family to go to college, and had to stay back a year to qualify for this scholarship actually. And he was always a great advocate for university higher level access. And there at the university, he happened to walk into a hotbed of cultural flowering that was happening, and it was really exemplified by a teacher there, a professor, a man called Sean Ó Súilleabháin. And Sean Ó Súilleabháin, back in the 60s, was the first person to ever to re-evaluate Irish traditional music and Irish culture in a way that had been lost in the modern world. So back in the 50s and 60s, the height of culture was thought to be British culture, and that the Irish culture was old-fashioned and embarrassing and a thing of the past and something to be forgotten and let go of. And the height of global culture was, you know, the British culture, the English language, and being a global citizen. And Sean Ó Riada came and said, you know what, actually, that's not true. That's actually not a true story. And we're standing on a gold mine here. And Irish traditional culture is on a par with all the great global cultures of the world. And it is an ancient and a beautiful culture, a culture that holds extraordinary wisdom and learning and sophistication and beauty. And so what Sean did was he dedicated himself to the Irish language, and his name was Sean Reedy, actually, John Reedy, and he changed his name into the Irish language, Sean Ó Riada, which is the ancient form of the Anglicization of his name. And he went to the local Irish-speaking area. There was a handful of Irish-speaking areas left at the time, as there are today, and dedicated himself to learning the Irish language and Irish culture. And he took a bunch of these farmers and fishermen from the region, and they were singing these extraordinary songs and holding this amazing culture and music. And Sean, he arranged a stage show of this music and brought it and put on a show in Dublin. This was the first time that Irish traditional music was featured on a stage in a theatre. It had never been, because it was before that time it was a peasant culture, and it was frowned upon, you know, like a redneck or hillbilly culture, something that was beneath contempt of civilized society. And so Sean took it, put it on a stage, and he dressed up the lads in a tuxedos, you know, and put them up on stage. And he arranged this show. And there was a famous recording of it, Ó Riada's Gaiety, the Gaiety Theatre. So the album is simply called Ó Riada in the Gaiety, Ó Riada's Gaiety. And Sean had also scored this music, bringing Irish traditional music and classical music together for a famous movie that was shot at the time. And it really inspired the Irish imagination and caused people to look into Irish traditional culture in a new way, and in a way that reevaluated Irish culture. And so my father was an 18-year-old boy stepping into the music department in the University College Cork with Sean Ó Riada as his professor. And there he met my mother, Nora Nurian, and the two of them instantly fell in love with each other and with Irish traditional culture. And their whole lives were dedicated to re-evaluating and renewing Ireland's perception of its own identity, and the world's perception of Ireland's identity too. And so it's hard for us today to imagine a time when Irish traditional culture was looked down upon to the extent that it was in the 1950s and 60s, you know. But it was very much a contemptible culture for civilized society at the time. And my father and my mother too dedicated their lives to bringing Irish traditional culture on a world stage and saying that this is a world culture. And while my father was he was an amazing virtuosic piano player and brought Irish traditional music to the piano, to the orchestra, to jazz, but he also brought the performance of Irish traditional music and dance into the university system, where you could get accredited, you could get a degree in the performance of Irish traditional dance and culture. So this all sounds to our minds today in 2025 very radical and unrevolutionary. Like, what's the big deal? You're getting a master's degree in Irish dancing, you know. But it's important to know that times change and things change, and there actually was a time when getting a master's in Irish traditional dance was treasonous and punishable by death, actually. There was a time where studying the Irish language was something that you could be put to death for doing during the penal times. You have to go back about 220 years in Ireland for that to be the case. But in Ireland, that's not a long time, Melvin. That's not a long time at all, you know. So it's interesting how times change. Yeah, so that really is one aspect of his revolutionary and radical aspect. And I suppose what you asked how that influences me. And so what I've done really is taken Irish traditional culture and shared it specifically in the United States very actively. And I've gone around to organizations and universities and groups, speaking with people like yourself, and saying that the story about Ireland isn't about Ireland at all, actually. It's about the unquenchable, unstoppable human desire to be recognised as an equal. And that if Ireland can do it, anyone can do it. That's how his radical and revolutionary aspects have influenced me. Yeah.
That's awesome. So we were just talking about your dad, and obviously you inherited your family name from him. So how did your family manage to maintain the original Gaelic spelling and pronunciation when most of the clan anglicized the name to O'Sullivan and then later to just Sullivan once they came to the United States?
Melvin, well spotted. And indeed, I should have referred to that in my earlier answers, because my father's family had changed their name to Sullivan. And so he went to the University College Cork as Michael O'Sullivan. And my mother went as Noreen Ryan. But influenced by the radical milieu of the time, they decided to change their names back to the Irish language. So they both did that. My mother now is Noreen Ní Rian. Ní denotes the feminine, the daughter of Ryan, Ní Rian. And my father changed his name from Michael Sullivan to Micheál Ó Súilleabháin.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And that's a good jumping off point for my next question, because I hopefully I'll impress you with this, because I've been practicing the spelling of your name in the Gaelic. So let's try O Fada, S U Fada, ILLEABH Fada IN.
Melvin, most Irish people couldn't have done what you just did. That's award winning.
I've been
award winning
for a week.
It's so strange. In the US, people spell the name better than people in Ireland. People in Ireland are just lazy. They'll just jam it out. But people in the US will actually take the time to copy and paste and make sure it's all okay. You know?
I found it fascinating, and I've watched a couple of videos on how to pronounce Gaelic names, and so I have literally been practicing that for a week.
It's beautiful. Brings a tear to my eye.
Wow. So why are Irish names so hard for English speakers to pronounce correctly? And I'm thinking about specific names like Cueva, Siobhan, and Seamus.
It's fascinating. But of course, these languages, these names, which is true for almost every culture, you know, for every culture, were oral before the concept of letters were ever invented. That these names came from just word of mouth and from mouth to ear. And then later, societies adopted language literacy and started to write these names down. And so, you know, I mean, you could ask a linguist for the history of putting words on the Irish language. Irish stories were first written down by the monks in early medieval Ireland, so about 1,000 years ago, and they were using the Latin script. And so since then, the names have the way to write down the names has evolved, you know, as script and society has evolved. And then a strange thing happened in the maybe it was around the 40s or 50s in Ireland, where they tried, there used to be an older way to write these names that used little dots and other little kinds of linguistic symbols, and the linguists modernized it, and so the BH became a V, or the V sound became this BH sound, and MH, and so in a way it's kind of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole kind of thing. And so our language is Anglis. It's a British, a Latin script, but an English form of the Latin script and the Irish language is being kind of shoehorned onto this. So there's a mismatch, and that's why it's such it messes with your head, because those words don't line up to the sounds. Yeah.
Absolutely. They don't look like Quiva.
They don't.
My daughter had a friend in middle school named Quiva, and that's how I know how to pronounce that name. But there is no way you would guess that's her pronunciation.
Quiva, and it's lovely. And the Irish pronunciation, it has this Quiva. We pronounce things in the back of the mouth. Quiva. That's a lovely softness, which of course the language can never, the English script or the English way of pronunciation doesn't pronounce like that, so there isn't even a way to denote Quiva, that lovely gentle sound.
Yeah, for the video, I'll put the spelling up so people can see it, because they're not going to guess. If you don't know, they're not going to guess. All right, so before we started recording, I mentioned to you about an episode I had a couple of years ago with a professor from the University of Texas who is a historian on Texas German. And during that episode, he talked about the effort of the Irish government to reinvigorate the Gaelic language. And we talked about if that was a possibility for Texas German. And he didn't think he thought it was too late for that. But the Irish government has started a Gaelic project called the 20-Year Strategy for the Irish Language 2010 to 2030. So how has that become a part of the culture other than just reinvigorating the language?
It's fascinating, and I always say that Ireland is such a great little case study for other countries and cultures around the world to learn the things that work, and more importantly, in a way, the things that don't work. And it's amazing to look at Irish traditional music and dance and what has happened there, and compare it to the Irish language and what has happened there. And Irish traditional music and dance are recognised nearly in every country around the world. It's phenomenal. I mean, if a government wanted to do a propaganda campaign, it wouldn't be as successful. And a lot of it happened very organically. Now, there are other structural reasons why our traditional music and dance have been so globally known, and that's a whole other conversation. But really, there was not a central state initiative to promote Irish traditional music and dance abroad. It was very organic and anarchic. Now, the Irish language is something very different, where from the formation of the Irish state, going way back to 1921, when Ireland first became a free state, free from the British Empire, there was immediately a government initiative to promote the Irish language. And it was known that the language, actually preserving the language, is one of the most fundamental ways of preserving an identity. That language is an identity. And of course, great empires know that too, and try to wipe out languages, as well as the British Empire tried to do in Ireland with the Irish language. And so there was a great governmental initiative to promote the Irish language. And so the Irish language has always been compulsory in school, right up until the end of high school, right up to the age of 17, 18, from your first days in school. And there have been all sorts of kind of sort of tax incentives and governmental support for industries to set up in these Irish language speaking areas, and to promote the language in various other ways, various governmental initiatives. And really, they haven't had the effect that was planned. The Irish language is still only spoken in very isolated areas. Now, it still exists, but the Irish language speakers today that I know living over there are extremely pessimistic about the future of the language, And so despite all the efforts that the governments over the decades have thrown at the Irish language, it has not grown and taken foot in the ways that it has in other countries. Like, for example, Scotland has an amazing, very dynamic relationship with Scots Gaelic, which is a form. It's another form of very closely related to the Irish language. Wales too, West Britain, has a very strong relationship with its language as well too, and. But for some reason, the Irish language, it hasn't had the same dynamic effect. Now, there is this other movement in Ireland, the Gael Scolanna, the Irish language schools, and that is a sort of an anarchic, self-organized movement of parents and teachers who've come together to create schools that teach children only in Irish and don't use English at all. So you learn mathematics in Irish, you learn English in Irish, you learn French through Irish. And now those schools have actually taken root all across the country. But again, the kids, when they leave the school and they watch TV or talk to their friends, they're still speaking English, or at home, they're mostly speaking English. But their level of fluency is much higher than in the public schools, So it's very interesting. But unfortunately, my friends, I wasn't brought up as a native Irish language speaker, but I have friends who were and who do live and dedicate their lives to that. And unfortunately, every time I talk to them, they're very pessimistic about it. Yet still it is holding on. It is still holding on. And as I say, Latin has come and gone. The great Roman Empire has come and gone, and all these other empires in Western Europe have come and gone. And somehow the Irish language is still spoken as a first language in these handful of communities on the west of Ireland. So that's really all I can say on that. Yeah, for now, it's complex and poignant. Complex and poignant.
Absolutely. So before we started recording and in email exchanges, I mentioned to you that I've always been interested and fascinated by the Celtic culture. So then after I did my DNA tested, I discovered that I was 10% Scottish, and that just increased my curiosity. So I'm wondering, have you ever seen any Irish or Scottish citizens that look like me?
Well, Irish or Scottish citizens, I mean, I'll tell you, so I was born in 1980 in Ireland, right? Now, if someone saw anyone of any complexion that was not a glowing pink, like the rest of us, this was the news of the day. I saw this fella now walking down the street today, and he was as black as this was the biggest news you could talk about. And where was he? Who was he from? Was he a doctor? Was he a doctor from? That would be the only thing if you were a doctor from England, and maybe from an English college. Was he a doctor? Was he? Or a priest sometimes from Africa, you see, would come up, to Ireland. And from one of the missions that the Irish had founded there'd be a black African coming up to Ireland. And it would be the news of the day. And then what happened, the Irish economy really exploded in the 1990s and globalized in a way it never had before. And suddenly people wanted to emigrate to Ireland. When for 150, 160 years, its population had only decreased, since the Great Irish Famine in the 1840s. And so suddenly people from all over the world were showing up in Ireland in the 90s. It was an extremely exciting time. And I ended up doing a master's degree in international relations. And I studied global migration and people getting asylum, claiming asylum, United Nations asylum seekers in my hometown of Limerick. And so at the time, people were coming into my little hometown from all over the world at the time. And that was the first wave. But since then, and that was in the early 2000s, and over the last 20 years, actually, Ireland, more and more immigration has come to Ireland. And the people who came in the 90s and the early 2000s started having kids. So now there's 20-year-old kids, 20-year-old Irish people, of all complexions and shades, with the purest Irish accents you could imagine from all parts of the country. And Ireland has hugely diverse accents, from Dublin City, there's maybe 4 or 5 different accents where you can tell where the person's from. My city of Limerick, there's about 3 accents, and you can tell exactly where people are from. And even their education level, and their class, it's a marker of class as well too. So you can tell where these people were raised in Ireland now. But I mean, they look like They could be from anywhere in the world. And they're making culture as well, too, in a very different way. They're using Irish traditional culture, but they're adding global cultures and cultures from Africa and their own countries, or other parents' countries, you know. And so right now, Ireland is an incredibly diverse place, especially Dublin. Dublin's basically like a European capital, you know.
Wow.
And so the country is changing. It's very exciting. And so I've lived in the US now for 15 years. And so those 15 years have been hugely consequential when it comes to concepts of identity and race in Ireland. And it's a fascinating time. It's a really interesting time now.
Now I really want to go visit.
And the Irish, you see, we're a very curious people, Melvin, you know. So when someone shows up that's a little different looking, you get great attention. People want to know, who are you now, and where do you come from, and what do you do here, and what's it like back there in Texas? And there's another very interesting dynamic too. When I was growing up in Ireland in the 80s and 90s, that a lot of people from people of colour from the US coming to Ireland can experience this very unusual feeling that, from an Irish perspective, you are American, you know, and you could be, you know, you could identify as Native American, Asian American, you know, Indian American, African American, or whatever, Texan American, or German Texan American. In Ireland, you were all just Americans. Like, when I was a kid, I never realised that Stevie Wonder was black, or Michael Jackson, although he was always a bit in between things. But as from in the 1980s in Ireland, Stevie Wonder was American, you know. Bill Cosby was, because the Cosbys used to show in Ireland in the 80s. All I saw was Americans.
That's fascinating.
Isn't it? Yeah, and so people feel that when they're in Ireland, they're like, oh, like, because we see you as like, you're American, like. And so when you're in conversation with an Irish person, it feels a bit different, because usually when you're in conversation with someone who looks like this, there are dynamics in the room, you know, very subtle and ingrained, you know, very deep dynamics that some people are more perceptive of than others. But those don't exist, or they're very different in Ireland, even though the exterior looks similar, English speaking, white faced. But this kind of gestures, or the tonality of the conversation is very unusual. So people feel that in Ireland, which is cool. Yeah,
that is really interesting and fascinating.
Yeah.
So you mentioned being from Limerick, Ireland.
Yeah.
Do children in Limerick learn limericks in school, or do they just call them poems?
No. It's a great question. And if I could, I could speak for at least 20 minutes on this. Yes, we call them limericks. And I remember as a kid in Limerick, I the day I realised, I'm like, hang on a minute, they're called after my town. And so in the 1600s, Limerick was the site of this great festival of poetry. And these poets from all around would come, and they would battle rap in this form of poetry. And it took its name from Adair, the town near Limerick where it was from. And seemingly these poets would extemporaneously, you know, do this battle rap in this form with each other, and they would be adjudicated, you know, and there would be a winner. And the greatest poet would be able to, you know, be the most tricky and the most deft with their language in this form. And then, of course, yeah, they've famously taken on a much more bawdy and ribald flavour, yeah, as they've gone through time. But perhaps they always had that kind of spin or hit to them, you know, that there was something in it. So there's a great history to it there. But no, we love limericks in Ireland, yeah, to this day.
I never would have thought of rap battles in Ireland, and that never would have crossed my mind.
Great poetic lineage in that country, I can tell you. Yeah, so proud.
What I want to talk to you about now. Do you have a favorite Irish poem that you'd like to share with us?
I'll tell you, my favourite Irish poet right now is Seamus Heaney. Seamus Heaney, Heaney, and Heaney died about what we're 2025, maybe back in 2009 or 10 or something. And he was very much the poetic sort of elder of my parents' generation, and in Ireland, poets are taken very seriously, very, very seriously. The poet is considered at the vanguard of culture. They are almost like a druid incanting the world into being, and they are imbued with a great sense of importance and national potency. Yeah, even in our modern world today. And Seamus Heaney was donned that mantle of Ireland's national poet, especially during the time he was born in Northern Ireland, which is still in the United Kingdom, and he was born on the Catholic side of the fence, the kind of native Irish side of the fence, as opposed to the colonial British population who identify as Protestant. And so people throughout Heaney's life were always asking him about the Civil War in Northern Ireland and what side the Ireland's national poet came down on. And he would never really come down on a side, and he would always just point to his work. He was fascinating like that. So I'm very interested in his work, and there's one poem that I learnt off a couple of years ago, and at my events, I sing songs. I should sing you a song as well, Melvin, before we go. But I also love to recite poetry. To recite poetry by heart. I think this is an amazing discipline that we've lost in our society today, is the recitation of poetry. And of course, before the invention of words, all poetry was recited by heart, and poets had an extraordinary capacity for memorization, which they were prized and treasured for. So I learnt off this poem called that Seamus Heaney wrote on I think it was the 20th anniversary of the founding of Amnesty International, the human rights organization, the international human rights organization called Amnesty International. And they came to Seamus Heaney to write a poem for the anniversary. And at first he tried and sort of did all kinds of research and tried to find a way in, and he couldn't. He said, he had to actually refuse the commission. And of course, the minute he refused it, the poem came to him. And this is an extraordinary poem called From the Republic of Conscience. From the Republic of Conscience. And he talks about visiting this imaginary place. And so I'll try to recite it. And if I stumble, I'll have to pull it up. So this is Seamus Heaney from the Republic of Conscience. And he says, when the engine stopped, it was so quiet on the runway that you could hear a curlew calling high up in the air. At immigration, the old man produced a wallet from his homespun coat and showed me a photograph of my grandfather. The woman at customs asked me to declare the ancient cures and charms for averting the evil eye. No porters, no luggage, no taxis. You carried your own baggage, and pretty soon all feelings of creeping privilege slipped away. Fog is a dreaded omen there, but lightning spells universal good, and parents hang swaddled infants in trees during thunderstorms. Salt is their precious mineral, and seashells are held to the ear during births and funerals. The base of all inks and pigments is seawater. Their sacred symbol is a stylized boat. Their sail is an ear, the mast a sloping pen. The hull mouth-shaped, the keel an open eye. At their inauguration, public leaders must swear to uphold unwritten laws and weep to atone for their presumption to hold office, and to affirm their faith that all life sprang from the salt tears which the sky god wept after he dreamt his solitude was endless. I came back from that frugal republic with my 2 arms the one length. The customs woman having insisted my allowance was myself, the old man rose and gazed into my eyes and said that was official recognition that I was now a dual citizen. He therefore desired me, when I got home, to speak on their behalf in my own tongue. Their embassies, he said, were everywhere, but operated independently, and no ambassador would ever be relieved.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. So the Protestant Catholic struggles have divided the country into 2 parts with 2 different capitals, as you alluded. So Dublin's the capital of the Republic of Ireland, and Belfast is the capital of Northern Ireland. This topic is personal for me because my son-in-law's family's last name is Clabby, and his ancestors founded the village of Clabby, Northern Ireland. So have you ever been to Clabby, Northern Ireland?
No, I've not.
It's a tiny little place. I haven't been there either, but I've seen it online, and that's one of my goals is to take my grandchildren there one day and explore that part of their heritage.
Beautiful.
So do you actually need a passport to go between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland? Or do you just cross back and forth?
Now you can just cross. Yeah. Since the peace agreement in 1998. Yeah.
So before, you actually needed a passport? I was sort of halfway joking, but you did actually need a passport?
Yes. Before then, the northern part of the country was in the midst of a very vicious civil war. And so security was extremely tight. Yeah. And I remember traveling up there as a child, being terrified at border checks with soldiers, and their big guns leaning in the window, Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. All right, so to branch out a little bit more. When we were exchanging emails, you asked me some of the things that made me curious about Ireland, and Celtic culture, and I mentioned Irish landscapes, Celtic songs, and redheads. I'll just throw that out there. But right now, I'd like to focus on music. I've been really interested in Celtic music. So do you have a song that you would like to share on any subject of Irish culture?
Absolutely, yeah. Let me think now. What would be a nice one? And of course, there's another great poet before Seamus Heaney. One of Ireland's other great national poets was a man called William Butler Yeats. Yeats spelled Y-E-A-T-S, Yeats. And Yeats was a great figure. He was an extraordinary mind. Wrote the most imaginative, wild, deep, dense sort of poetry. And he was also a statesman and very active politically and publicly in Irish national life, especially as Ireland was fighting for independence from the British Empire. So he's a very public figure throughout that, and then eventually became a statesman and was appointed a senator in the upper house of the Irish National Parliament, and was never shy of, writing letters to the national media and getting into the fray of Irish national politics. He's a very controversial figure. It was fascinating to think of a poet having such a national stature. If you consider the stature of our poets today, could you imagine a poet actually having the gravitas and weight in national politics or society today? It's interesting, isn't it? And Yeats was very much that figure, as Heaney was as well too, but Heaney in a much more less confrontational way. He was much more metaphorical in his sort of stance on things, but Yeats was not. He was very, very evocative, very, very vocative, in his stances. He was quite a crazy character, but he had also this ability to take the Irish folk tradition and write in a very common way, and in a way that mirrored Irish folk tradition. And so one of his most famous poems is called The Sally Gardens, and this is known and beloved by people in Ireland. And he wrote it to a traditional Irish song, and so I think I'll sing that to you now. It's very simple, it's very beautiful.
Okay.
And it's all around the dynamic of love and of yearning, and of age, of time, and as well too, it continuously returns to the healing power of the natural world, and how the natural world, the Sally Gardens, the Sally there refers to the Sally tree. The Sally tree is also known as the willow. And the Sally tree has always had the association of something very medicinal and potent. And so we get aspirin from the Sally, the bark of the Sally tree. And so even in our pharmaceutical contemporary modern world, it is a tree that we go to for the relieving of pain. And in the past, if you were sailing and you saw a Sally Garden on the shore, you knew that there was fresh, clear water to get, that the Sally tree loved growing around fresh, clear streams and brooks. So the Sally tree was always a place for refuge and for calm and for beauty and for healing water to come. So Yeats is talking about this phenomenon of learning from the natural world and observing the natural world, and specifically how water works in the natural world when it comes to healing our own pain. So I'll give you an old blast of the Sally Gardens. Hang on, I'll play. I'll play it here on my guitar. Let's see here. Now, is that coming through?
Yes, it is. Loud and clear.
Is that coming through okay? Down by the Sally Gardens, my love and I did meet. She passed the Sally Gardens with her little snow white feet. She bid me take life easy as the leaves grow on the trees. But I was young and foolish, and with her did not agree. In a field down by the river, my love and I did stand, and on my leaning shoulder she placed her snow white hand. She bid me to take love easy as the grass grows on the weirs. But I could not agree. And now I'm full of tears.
Thank you. Very nice. So next I want to talk very briefly about Irish mythology. So this may be the most important question I ask you today.
Okay.
So if you were a betting man, who do you think would win in a fight between a leprechaun and a hobbit?
Oh my goodness. I mean, the Hobbit doesn't stand a chance. They're different like weight categories. You know, like it wouldn't be fair. The leprechaun is, oh my God. The leprechaun is a very, very mysterious and yeah, like you don't want to get on the wrong side of a leprechaun. They can be nasty, you know. And it's interesting. The fairy people in Ireland, like the leprechauns, they're not to be messed with. Like they're kind of nasty, you know. They're not fun. If you end up crossing paths with them, it's not a good day. Like you're in trouble, you know. We're not supposed to meet. We're supposed to respect each other from a distance. And we're not really supposed to meet with the leprechauns. There's a breach in the matrix if you meet a leprechaun. Whereas now, if you were to meet a hobbit, I'd say you could sit down and have a drink with a hobbit. You know, I think you could have a bit of fun. You could have a relationship, but leprechauns, you can't have a relationship with them. They work on a different currency. It's totally weird. They're weird.
That's good to
Wouldn't
know.
trust them. Wouldn't trust them, Melvin.
If I run across a leprechaun, I'm just going to go the other way.
Everybody, yeah, all accounts would say, just go quickly as possible. Yeah. Some people try to capture them, you see, and try to get the better of them. Never works out.
That's funny that you said that, because my next question is, as kids, did you and your brother Molly ever set a trap to catch a leprechaun?
We probably did. But, you know, we used to, in primary school, we went to elementary school out in the country in Ireland, and there was still an element of the folk tradition was there. And a part of that tradition was you did not mess with the other world, you know. You didn't mess with it, and you had to have a reverence for it, and a fear, you know, out of respect. And there would be, you know, like trick or treat. Halloween is a Celtic festival. All of the elements are there. Trick or treat. Like if you don't give a sacrifice to the invisible forces, they're going to come and trick you. They're going to get you. So. There was a sense growing up as a kid of being afraid and, you know, not messing around with these places. Farmers don't, you know, still today, this day, they will leave certain trees and circles. They will not plow through them. Right up to this day, there's a reverence for it. You don't mess around with that fairy tree. You don't plow through that stone circle, you know, and that's there today. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. How many four-leaf clovers have you seen in your life?
Probably a few. Yeah, often it's someone will run up to me with one, you know, that we bring to Ireland or something, and they'll insist that they found one. Then it's interesting, you know. It's funny that the whole association with Irish culture and luck, you know, and fortune. And there's a really funny song, I don't know if you know of it. John Lennon wrote a song about the luck of the Irish. Do you ever hear that one?
I'm sure I have. I know every song by the Beatles and them together individually. It's
so funny. What are the lyrics? Hang on a second. Let me check this out. It's so funny. Hang on. It goes, okay, 1, 2, 3. If you had the look of the Irish, you'd be sorry and wish you were dead. You should have the look of the Irish and you'd wish you were English instead. 1,000 years of torture and hunger drove the people away from their land. A land full of beauty and wonder was raped by the British brigands.
Wow.
And his whole thing is, if you had the look of the Irish, you'd be sorry and wish you were dead, you know?
Well, let's just stick with the good luck part of the four-leaf clover. Not that. That sounds.
There's something. There's something there, and I think it goes back to the geography of the place. That it has this miraculous geography in a place where it shouldn't have, and it has this extraordinarily hospitable climate. That's shocking to the continental imagination, where you're fighting for survival so often in so many seasons, and those don't come into play. Those you don't have to worry about those types of climates when you're in Ireland, and so it feels very fortunate. Yeah, very blessed. Yeah.
Wow. So I just have a couple more questions as we start to wind down the conversation. One thing I'm really curious about before we go: in the late 1990s, I was obsessed with this Christian Celtic band called Eden's Bridge. In fact, my youngest daughter is named Eden because of that band. So do you happen to, by any chance, know the lead singer of that band? And her name is Sarah Lacey.
Sarah Lacey, Eden's Bridge. No, I've never heard of them now.
Wow.
No.
Now you have a homework assignment.
I'll have to check them out. Yeah. And do you think, did they come out of Ireland, or were they based in the US, or do you know?
I'm pretty sure they were based in Ireland.
Oh, interesting. Eden's Bridge.
The late 90s. My daughter was born in 99.
I'll have to check them out. And here's a question for you, Melvin. Like, from what I've been saying about those associations and images of Ireland, does that ring a bell with your own idea and sort of romantic idea of the place itself? Does it fit? Yeah.
Generally, I like the thing about not being at risk of being killed by the Four Seasons. That's something I never considered before. But the lush landscape is I've seen in photographs, and that's part of what I think interests me about the country. But I never really understood how or why that came about.
Where were you raised? Were you raised in Texas?
I was raised in Texas, yes.
Around the San Antonio area?
Well, Houston is my hometown.
Houston.
But my family's, I'm a sixth generation Texan. So
okay.
My family's been here for a long time.
And was it around the Houston area?
Yes.
So Houston is extraordinary. We've been to Houston a few times. There's a great Irish centre there at the University, St. Thomas. Mm-hmm. And we've been down there a couple of times. They put us up in the Houstonian Hotel. You know the Houstonian Hotel there? And the second time we went down, the hotel had just been recovering from a flood. A huge flood that had come in and swamped the whole hotel. And the time we were there before, the land was parched, and there was a little river nearby and a beautiful park. But I mean, the river that's all that was there. There was only a tiny little trickle going through the park, you know, and it was dry, you know, and you could feel the land was thirsty, and you could feel the dust in your mouth, and went back again, and the place was recovering from a devastating flood. And I just thought to myself of those extremes, you know, and then of course, yeah, and then seeing, I mean, Ireland is just the water is everywhere. There's wells and streams and rivers, but it rarely actually floods, you know. It's just wet all the time, but rarely do you get these deluges or floods. Now, in some towns and built up areas more recently, there have been problems with floods, but of course a lot of that has to do with the development itself, you know, building on places where people, you know, you wouldn't have built in the past. And so it must have been interesting seeing these, and of course that means it's green all the time. Like, never it doesn't, there's no forest fires in Ireland. There's never been a fire. Like, it's not a thing. It can't happen. It's too wet, you know. And so that's a big part of those photos that you would have seen to the Houstonian, San Antonian imagination is this constancy of green. Must be quite unbelievable. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Houston rains. We get about 40 inches of rain a year in Houston, often more. San Antonio, not even half that amount.
Wow.
And it's hotter in San Antonio than Houston, but it's more humid in Houston than San Antonio. So you get varieties of generally bad weather, extreme heat, hurricanes in the summertime, or tornadoes.
Hurricanes. There's a hurricane blows in off the Atlantic once every 20 years, and one just hit Ireland actually a few months ago, and the country is just not built for it. So there was 30,000 places without power for a week or something, and scrambling to try to get the place up. So yeah, we just get about a hurricane once every 20 years or something. It's the tail end of one that comes in through the US and then it comes over across the Atlantic, so it's at the tail end of the energies of the things you guys get in off the Gulf there, so. Well, Melvin, I can't wait until you visit Ireland. Will you remember to contact me when you go to visit?
Not only that, I hope to have you as my tour guide. That would be
Well, you would be extremely welcome. I mean, we lead these with my mother and my brother. We lead these experiences in Ireland that are deep dives into the cultural and spiritual landscape. And what we do is very different to the great pioneering American imagination of trying to see everything in Ireland in 1 week. We stay in one place for the week and we form a little community. And then each day we drive around in 4 minivans and we gather together in the morning first for a session of poetry and song and story and conversation like we're having here. And then we head out for a trip to these sites. And in Ireland is just littered with these places, these holy wells and ancient sites, sacred sites and cultural nodes in the landscape. And we go and visit those places and we'll sing there or give an old poem there to these places and a bit of the history. And then, of course, Irish food is extraordinary. All local, natural, organic food and great company. And so, it would be an honor to have you along someday, yeah.
That would be amazing. Yeah. So you touched on it, but I want you to be specific in discussing the Inner Soul Circle. So just tell the audience about that and how they can reach out to you and become a part of it.
Yeah, so the Inner Soul Circle, we started more formally last year. So it's been a full year now, and it's an online community, and it's based around the work that me and my brother and our mother do together. And so it's a monthly membership community. And so each month we share we follow the Celtic wheel of the year. So the Celts had 4 major festivals throughout the year at the 4 cross quarters. And in the Western imagination, we highlight the solstices and the equinoxes, we think are the main points of the year. But the Celts actually believe that the most important points of the year were in between those 4 nodes at the cross quarters, which is a great insight into the Celtic imagination, which really prized the concept of threshold, of movement, rather than of stasis and set kind of identity. That the Celts always believed in this concept of motion and movement. So they much preferred to mark the threshold times between those high and low points. So the four Celtic seasons are based on those cross quarters. And so each season we focus in on those quarters, which of course are just metaphors for the inner life, because we all have these inner seasons going on within us. Many, the great wheel of the year is one life's whole turning. But within us at all times, we have all these different seasonal relationships with our work, with our family lives, with our sense of artistry and creativity and spirituality. And so we look at the season as a metaphor for these things. And there's great culture and mythology and story when it comes around that. So each month we send out a letter from one of the 3 of us. We send out then the following week a pre-recorded course that we've given online around these themes of the season. And then on the 3rd Saturday of each month, we meet live online for a 2-hour live session on Zoom. And me, my brother, and my mom, and we have a bit of conversation, and then we break people off into breakout rooms to have a conversation amongst each other, because this is all about a community. And we meet on this online platform called The Circle. And it has a phone app and everything. And we can share just like a social media website, and people can reach out and keep in touch with each other through that website as well too. So that's the Inner Soul Circle. And then we bring people to Ireland as well too for the week. And myself and my brother perform regularly around the country here as well too, and work with organizations and individuals in very interesting ways. Yeah.
That is all so interesting and fascinating. So, Owen, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your wisdom and talent with the audience. It's been one of the highlights of my year to have this conversation with you.
Well, that's very nice. And may I just also affirm your great intention for sharing these stories and elevating the common humanity that we have, and that the necessity of mutual respect when it comes to having a decent and good society and world, which we all wish to share and bequeath to the next generation. So I honor you for that, Melvin. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So if you don't already follow me on Spotify or some other podcast platform, I would appreciate it if you would do that now. And please share this episode with somebody else who would think it was as interesting and fascinating as I do. And if they don't, send it to them anyway. They'll listen to it, and then they'll find it interesting and fascinating. So that's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.